Hello, everyone. Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you to Salman for helping me launch this. Today's pub day. It's very exciting. So the book is called Small Days and Nights, and it's largely set in South India, in Tamil Nadu, which is where I live too, in a small village called Paramankeni. But today, it also scatters around in different places. And I thought maybe I would read a small section of the book that is set in America, in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this is a small scene, which is the protagonist, Grace, who is going along with her best friend, an Ethiopian girl called Misrak, who is going to have a marriage in order to get a green card. So it's a kind of fake marriage. Okay. There was a spring day in Charlotte, 2002, and I think it's possibly when I was happiest. The sky was wide and bright, the air tripping with the lightness of small birds. Misrak and I are driving to the courthouse. She's wearing a white column dress bought on the cheap, a silver tiara set back in her curls, a netted veil. She's smoking, elbow propped out of the window, and we're laughing because it is all a moving picture story and we are the protagonists. On the way there, Misrak screeches, "Fuck, I forgot to get rings." "What rings?" Rings. We need rings to get married." We detour to Walmart and Misrak leads the way, marching giraffe-like on satin platform shoes, veil streaming behind her. "Jewelry?" She barks at one of the name-tagged employees. "Where can I get jewelry?" We follow each other down the aisles. I am in a magenta Ethiopian dress that has been shunted around for different weddings. The fabric scratches against my knees, but I stride as if I'm the kind of woman who can withstand any kind of inconvenience. At the jewelry counter, Misrak says, "Give me the cheapest ring you have. I need 2 of them." The man at the counter smiles and says, "You have a happy life now, you hear?" as we turn away from him. At the courthouse, the boy Misrak will marry, a bebe, is hunched over a cigarette, wearing ivory silk pants and kameez. "You look good," Misrak says. "I bet you didn't think to get rings, you bastard." Blake, this is Grace's boyfriend, is there too. And it is a moment in our history when I'm still in love with the solidness of him. I stand next to him and he whispers, "This will be us soon, but we'll do it differently, of course." Misrak's boss, Patty, arrives with her husband. They're carrying a fluffy white fabric photo album and a bouquet of white roses. "Please, no slips, okay?" Misrak says when she sees them walking towards us. I told them it wasn't necessary, but Patty was hung up. She said if my family couldn't come, the least she could do is be here. Can you believe? It is over in minutes. We sign our names as witnesses. We take photographs in the sun. It is an afternoon of giddy delight, as if we were standing on a high mountain, the oxygen in our lungs clipped and clean. Later, at Applebee's, a bebe unbuttons the top of his kameez. "Coronas for everyone," he says, and the way he gesticulates, the great girth of him, makes me think that one day he'll make a woman burst with joy. Not Misrak, of course, but someone else. "I feel bad," Misrak says, looking at the card that Patty and her husband had placed in the album. They were so earnest, so full of good wishes, but it's also funny, isn't it? We laugh so much the stitches in our sides seem to come undone. To an outsider, we might have appeared like the subjects of a Bruce Weber photograph gone downscale. No Hamptons here, but look at this dewy skin, look at this golden light. That night, as Misrak and I lie across from each other on our mattresses, the dirty gray shag beneath us, she says, "They always tell us we need a man. All the old crones at home, they go on and on about how much we need a man. Even my lovely liberal father says it. He says it will make life acceptable. But what I need is America. And if a fake husband will get me a green card so I can stay, then I'll take him." 5 years later, Misrak met Jake at a library meeting, a man of such check shirt regularity it seemed unthinkable that they could love each other. But within weeks, they fitted parts of themselves into each other's voids, voids they didn't know they had. There was a speedy divorce from Abebe, who laughed loudly when he heard the news. My wife is in love with an American man, he chortled, and I am so happy. There was another trip to the courthouse, subdued, nervy. I yawned through the whole thing. Don't worry about me, Misrak said, crushing me against her. I'm not going to change a bit. When I think of weddings now, all the waste and propaganda, I prefer to remember that fake spring union of Misrak and Abebe. We understood that the dangers of hours and hours of cohabitation would never touch these two, and as such they were gleaming like the afternoon itself. We knew as well that our own futures were bound to be different. About romance and companionship we knew little, but watching those two commit themselves felt honorable, the way marriage was intended to be, a transaction devoid of the complications of love. Thank you.
All right. Well, happy publication day.
Thank you.
Yeah, it strikes me that what you've got here is a big novel masquerading as a small one. that it seems to be intimate and small scale, but actually it crosses an enormous amount of the world. Mm-hmm. And it takes in very big subjects, and that subject, the subject of not needing a man, mm-hmm. is somewhere close to the heart of it. And so let me just start off at the beginning. Where do you, given that this book has sections in Charlotte, sections in Chennai, Madras, and in this village by the sea, which mm-hmm. is more or less where you live, mm-hmm. And Kodaikanal, yeah. and Venice, mm-hmm. and some other places. Just talk about the starting point of the book. Where in all this did you find it, the book?
I wanted to write a small story, kind of claustrophobic, about a woman who finds out that she has a sister, a woman who didn't want to have children, who wasn't interested in family, who inherits somehow this burden, but decides morally that it's the right thing to do. And geographically, all these places are very autobiographical for me, because Venice, Charlotte, Madras, this village of Parmankeni, these are the places that I've inhabited in my life. And somehow for me, when I'm writing, I always return, well, Madras is the sort of focus point that I keep going back to, whether or not I like it. But I think that sense of writing the story and grounding it in these places, but particularly that village, was a way to just, tell this very small story of a woman who's kind of struggling with the choices that she makes.
So it was just that these were places that you could relax into, that you knew them. And so to put the story there was easy. And also, the title of the book, Small Days and Nights, it comes from this James Salter, quote from his book, A Sport and a Pastime, about how the knowledge of a country we get from the small towns. And because I'd been living in this small village in South India for 8 years, when I came to America, I didn't come to New York, I went to Charlotte. And so my whole life, I keep getting shoved to smaller places. And I thought, well, is there a story here that is as important, or that can also tell a larger story of nation, of country? Because I think a lot of the times we look to literature from the big centers, And I felt like actually, even in the small village, even in the small town, even in, the little rinky-dink place, there is a story to be told. Not that Venice is a rinky-dink place. No, but your story links worlds, doesn't it? It joins worlds together.
interesting about your choice of the quote from Sport and a Pastime, because, I mean, that's a book that's almost entirely about sex.
Yes.
and your book is only in a secondary way about sex. I mean, there's not a whole lot of sex in it.
No.
You know,
Small amount.
there's a small amount, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is probably the right amount, unless you're Jim Salter. But it is a book about passion and the lack of it, you know, and your character, for a lot of the book, is kind of quite emotionally withdrawn, you know, and hard for her in a way to be emotionally connected to people.
Yeah.
And then she has the sister. The sister has Down syndrome, and who she looks after and becomes, in a way, like she becomes almost like a parent to the sister. You know, and that relationship is at the heart of the book. And you want to just say something about that in terms of the fact that, in a way, they're both, for different reasons, very withdrawn people. You know? Both the sister and the kind of daughter / sister.
Right, yeah. That was definitely sort of that sense of that relationship of trying to write. I'm very interested in writing about sister relationships somehow. And I think in this case, that almost the sort of writing about what it means to be a caregiver, but without sentimentalizing the experience and what it actually requires, the day-to-day accretion of, you know, caring for someone. I wanted to capture that, but I also wanted to put it in this very isolating place. So you don't have just the relationship which strains, and where, you know, the language level is, you know, Grace can't even, there's very little to speak because the housekeeper speaks Tamil, her Tamil is not so good, and then her sister doesn't speak much. Then she has the dogs, and that's it, you know? And so you have this sort of lockdown in communication, but there's also this sense of the landscape being at the same time very beautiful, but also menacing. And I really wanted the landscape to play an important part of the book. Yeah. That sense of how something very beautiful and almost paradise can turn and become dangerous all of a sudden.
That sense of submerged danger, you know, is there in the book until it stops being submerged, until it emerges. Now, and is very powerful, I think. But I mean, now you live in something very like this place. I mean, you don't live as she does, you know, alone and with somebody that is incompetent almost, you know. But have you felt that about it? I mean, is that something that you feel about living in the village by the sea in Tamil Nadu, or not?
It is. I think the idea for the book came because I lived there with my husband, and I thought, well, what if he wasn't here? Would I be able to live here alone as a woman? Well, first of all, there's the thing of being alone and then losing the plot because you have nobody to talk to, which is separate. But I think the question in the Indian context was also the question of, if you're not in the city where you have a sense of safety in having people around you and community, then what would it be like to actually be a woman living out there where there's not that many people? And so then the threat of danger is high. And, you know, a lot of it, I mean, India is considered a dangerous place for women. It's high in the statistics and all of that. And even though the South doesn't have that sense of menace in the way that, say, when I go to Delhi, I think women feel it everywhere, that sense of just checking your surrounding, seeing what's behind. You know, it's just built into us somehow, and I think it gets heightened when there's not that many people around, because suddenly from out of the blue, someone will come and you will perceive it as a threat. Yeah. So the idea of the imagined fear and the real fear was also something I was playing with.
The specific danger that the book talks about has to do with development. Yeah. It has to do with local developers wanting to buy land and force people off it, you know, and sending bully boys, thugs, round to encourage people to leave.
Yeah.
Is that something that's going on in your neighborhood, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's been happening all down the coast, and I think India is sort of one of the top 5 countries where land grabbing has happened, and where you have this huge shift of resources from rural to urban because of this land grab, you know? And so I haven't experienced that myself, but that kind of, those stories are happening all along that coast.
What I think is very, clever in the book is that when the violence does arrive, it doesn't arrive at her door. It arrives at somebody else's door. You know, and so it's deflected a little bit, but you still feel it.
Yeah.
You know, and those characters, I think, the village headman that she thinks of in a way as a safe place, that she could go to him, and as long as she's okay with him, that things will be okay.
Yeah.
And the destruction of that safety is a very powerful moment in which you realize that there isn't a safe place. You know? But you were saying about not being in the city. I mean, there's a section of the book that deals with her social life in Madras. And you say Madras, not Chennai. I say Bombay, not Mumbai. And these things are important.
Yes.
But you talk about, she at one point talks about, I forget the phrase is, collecting a tribe. You know, that's to say, making a family around her. You know, and that's a part of the book that's where she finds a kind of home, but it can't go with her to where she lives. You know, those characters. I mean, they're very sweet characters, and some of them are lampooned and and made fun of, and some of them not. But it's a very believable, understandable Indian urban middle class world, you know. Yeah. And yet she makes this very big decision to not be in it.
Yeah.
You know, and I just want you to talk a little bit about isolation, about that, you know, about having a character who is so isolated, because also that starts earlier in her life with the, you know, her not only as her mother died, but her mother kept very big secrets from her.
Yeah.
You know, and her father is an absentee father.
Yeah.
You know, in Italy.
Yeah.
And so that's a very big part of who she is.
Yeah. I mean, this whole sense of trying to find a community, I think, is a big part of the book, because in a way I'm really attacking the idea of the family, which I think in India is, and I think in other places too, can be such an oppressive institution, and yet it's held up as the primary institution where you're supposed to get everything. And I come from a really nice family, actually, very supportive people. But I think that when you live in, a place where you see what families actually do to each other, and I'm married to an Italian, and the mafia kills way less people than Italian families kill each other. So, I mean, the statistics are really high of the damage and violence. And you think, well, is it possible then to explore other relationships of love and coming together that are not DNA based? And I know at this point in my life that particularly with women, and this is a book really about women in a large way, that they're finding their communities in different ways. And it's really about where do you get your people and how do you find them and how do you create the new family? Because the old family doesn't always work. The old system of the mother, father, it's sort of breaking down in a way. And so partly the book is trying to examine the difficulty and the struggle of that, but also pushing for saying, what are these alternative structures that may be available to us?
Yeah. What Goethe called elective affinities.
Yeah.
The people you choose.
Yeah.
Rather than the people who are given to you.
Exactly.
And
and also the idea of, I think the other thing which is important is the sense of how much we place in our children and the expectations we have of them. And because there is a sister in this book with Down syndrome and Grace, who's quite an imperfect protagonist and who's not always successful in her caregiving and who slips up. there's also this question of where are we going with this idea of the perfect human being, the perfect baby, the Petri dish designer baby, and blah, blah, blah. Because I think it's very hubristic, I think, of people to imagine that you can create this super person, because I feel that at some point we will fall short. And that is part of the underlying nature of the book.
So the imperfection of her character, what would you see as being the imperfection of her character?
I think she's someone who struggles with the idea of freedom versus duty. She feels morally obliged to look after the sister, but she's not exactly brimming over with love. So she wants to go into the city and get drunk with her friends and just be free of that responsibility. But at the same time, she doesn't exactly make all the required proper, arrangements. And so then she loses her temper, and so she falls short. But I think that's also, from what I understand with people who have been in caregiving situations, that there will be a moment when you fall short, and that is human. It's human to sort of want to care for another human being as well. And I think that was the other thing in the book, is how do we care for the people in our society who cannot take care of themselves.
It's interesting. I saw when the book came out in England, you I'm sure saw this, there was this review in The Guardian which described the book, I mean, it's a very positive review, but it describes the book as a howl of hatred and grief. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Was it something to do with Edvard Munch? The scream?
It's the big headline. No, but about the anger in the book.
I think there's anger. I think there's anger, and I think there's been anger in my work for this book and my collection of poems, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. And I think largely it has to do with being in India these last 10 years and going with my body as a woman, navigating through this space and feeling really a kind of fury and anger at the fact that there's just so much violence, for one, that we have to navigate, and just so much repression and so many things that you're trying to, not be bombarded and squashed down by. And at the same time, I would say that the story of women in India is such a one for rejoicing, because it's just, there's so much happening and so much that Indian women are doing. So it's this weird juxtaposition of, on one level, these horrible statistics and newspaper articles which just keep coming, and at the other end, the sort of strong resilience and
well,
beauty
I think they're two sides of the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that there is more than one generation now of women in India who are very determined to have their own lives and to not to have their lives dictated to them and imposed on them, and these young students are showing us, how to what lengths they will go to have that. And it seems to me that there is a kind of Indian male response to that, of which violence towards women is the manifestation. That's to say, it's to try and stop women from having that freedom.
Yes.
That the rape being used as an instrument of control.
Yeah.
And so I think the two things are, they're two sides of the same thing.
Absolutely. And so I think that rage or that sense of despair comes from, and not, if you want to even get into government and to men in power and all of that, there's this sense of living with this huge system of patriarchy around you, and then here you are trying to navigate your way. And so I think that my rage is a quiet one, and it surprised me as well, because I didn't necessarily think of myself as...
It doesn't read like a furious rant.
No, no.
If the anger is there, it's under the surface of things,
yes,
and bursts out every so often. But it's not like... It's not a scream.
No.
It's not like Ginsberg's howl. I mean, but the subject of anger, I think, is very important, because there is a lot to be angry about.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's one moment I mean, a line that kind of stopped me, actually, it's quite late in the book. It's after the act of violence takes place, you know, and characters say to each other, hang on, I'm going to make sure I don't misquote this, because the line I want you to talk about. 240. Yeah, she says that the central character, talking about her father, she says, Papi was right, I say, we're living with savages. So you're describing, or she's describing, the Indians amongst whom she lives by this very, very harsh word. And it seemed to me that's it's the angriest line in the book.
Yeah.
You know, and you want to just expand that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the father is a bit of a racist and is not one of those happy foreigners to be in India. He's somebody who doesn't really ever get it, and then he eventually goes back. And I think that my first novel, I was so in love with all of my characters, maybe too much so, that when I wrote this one, I wanted to have, I guess, a little bit more complicated and less lovable characters, but I still want to talk about the idea of love and how it's possible, and you know how we are all deeply flawed. And this moment after this huge act of violence, which we can talk about, I don't think it's a
We don't
spoiler.
want. It's not a spoiler. No.
No. There's an incident where, which is true. It was in a news story, and there's a village which was down the coast from me where they killed 400 dogs. Because what happens is that the stray dog population, they just sort of breed and it gets to be a little out of control, and then they just cull them, you know? And this is their way of population control. And sometimes they just give them cyanide, and then they bury the dogs in the water, you know, in the ground, and then goes into the water table. So it's a very gruesome, horrific thing. And I think that that's also something you come across in India a lot. You talk about a rape, and it's not just a rape, it's like burnt and then smashed on the head, and you know, it's gone to such a level of brutality and savagery. That's what it is. And so then when you come confronted with that, you think, why does it have to be like that? Do you know? We are violent as a species, and that's a fact, but this kind of violence is really, what do you do with it? How do you live amongst that without losing your sense of humanity as well? Do you know? That's why that line came, because I think there are moments when you feel it's too much.
But
know?
she doesn't run away.
No.
I mean, she stays.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, because she doesn't really even, as far as I can tell, think of running away. You know, she just stays. Because that's where she has found her place? I mean, a lot of the book is about, what is your place?
Yeah.
You know, what do you have a place? If so, where is it?
Yeah.
And is that because you felt that by then in the book, which is very late in the book, that she'd found her place?
Yeah, I think that the idea of place and belonging is so important to the book and to me as a writer, because everything that I've ever done has been an exploration of that, you know. And partly it's because I think I have a slight chip on my shoulder about it. So I was in an Uber pool yesterday, going to Brooklyn, and there was this. I got in the car, the guy next to me starts complaining. He says, like, starts huffing and puffing, and then the guy stopping to pick up another person, and he says, no, don't pick up anyone else. And then, you know, you think, what's wrong? So I'm not making eye contact at this point. And then a phone call comes, and he says, you know, I'm in a car. The Uber driver keeps picking people up. And it's like, this is Uber pool. That's what they do, you know. Anyway, and then he says, you know, don't mind me asking out of curiosity, but, you know, where did you grow up? So I said, I grew up in India. Oh, okay. Which part of India? Madras. I am a computer software engineer, so, you know, as you can imagine, I know lots of Indians. Great, good for you. And then, so it goes, and then finally he says, you know, but you are only half Indian. No offense, but you must be half something else.
Wow.
Okay, so I get this a lot. And it turns out that it's true.
It's true.
I am half Indian. I live in India. I write about India. But I think that part of my also anger and irritation is that my whole life I have been told, oh, you're only half Indian. This happens just, and it's not offensive. It's to do with what we expect of how somebody might look, you know? But you
well, I
don't
get
expect
asked if I'm Indian at all.
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm not even half Indian. 100%.
So I think this sense of expectation of what must a person sound like, what must a person look like, and you think this is 1.2 billion people, and you have one idea of what an Indian person looks like and sounds like.
We look like everything.
Yeah, and so that to me was something that I really wanted to explore. This sense of actually. Here in the book, Grace is a very exotic protagonist. She's half Italian and half Indian. But actually, a person coming from Assam to Delhi is going to feel like an outsider. A person going from Bangalore to Uttar Pradesh is going to feel, because of the way they look, the way that they don't speak the same language. And all of this sense of being outsidered is a very Indian experience. A lot of Indians are on the move and they are experiencing this all the time. And so that's what I want to write about, this sense of actually being in your country and being made to feel that this is not your place. This is not your, land. You don't belong here. You are from somewhere else. And now this debate is, of course, huge with what's happening with the Citizenship Act in India and stuff. So it's really a big issue for me.
So in the novel, there are these various places in which she has some sort of foothold, whether it's Italy or Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte, I think, is more like a moment in her past than in her present.
Yes.
And in the way that her marriage to what's his name, Blake, is not. I mean, there's one scene where it enters the present moment of the book, but otherwise it's mostly in the past. In the same way as in India, the Indian sections, there's a very evocative childhood passages in Kodaikanal. And when they return to the hill station, to the house where she was a child, it's a wreck. I mean, it would be easy to say that was a metaphor, that the place where you were a child is now a wreck, and you can't go back because it's not there to go back to. And that's some of what she feels, right? Because of how her parents have been.
Yeah.
The secretiveness of the mother, because the mother hides from her the fact that there is this other daughter, and disappears for one day a week without explanation to go to visit, as we later discover, to go to visit the other daughter. But for most of her childhood, she has this mother who disappears one day a week, and it's never discussed and it's never explained. So that sense of that the relationship with the mother is problematic in some way, is very central to the book. And later in the book, when there's the letter from the mother, do you feel that's a healing moment or not really? I wasn't certain how to. I mean, like when the mother writes from beyond the grave, and says, "I'm sorry, but this is what I was doing, and this is why I was doing it."
Yeah, I think I feel a lot that our parents, who are people that we think we know or are meant to be very close to, are in some ways can be sometimes strangers to us, and that we don't know an awful lot about them. And I think in the book I wanted to explore that sense of how actually your parents can keep secrets from you, very large secrets, and in this case it is a huge secret. But that sense of, I say in the book, I say something about, you never think that your parents will be more deceptive than you are. And of course they are. Yes. I think we all carry secrets, and there are just sort of certain patterns that come into families that once they're there, it's very difficult to break. So it's like, oh, we decided not to tell her, and now I guess it's too late, And that part of the story, actually, I was sort of reading about Arthur Miller and Inga Marath and how they had a son, Daniel, with Down syndrome, who they institutionalized, and how Arthur Miller never acknowledged him, never really visited him or anything. And this was in the 60s. And I thought that was such an interesting the interesting sense of how, I also say here, like she thinks, well, you had a kid, didn't work out the way you wanted, then you decided to have another kid. So she's really angry also at the parents to think that then they can just go again and try for the child that's normal, so to speak, Yeah. So yeah, it's not a healing moment. No,
they fuck you up, your mom and dad.
They do, Larkin.
They may not mean to, but they do.
But they do.
They give you all the faults they had and then some extra just for you. Yes. I mean, Larkin, of course, never had children. So, never mind Philip Larkin. Talking of Philip Larkin, you're also a poet.
Yeah.
You had this book come out, was it a year ago, just over a year ago?
2 years.
2 years ago, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, which has had a wonderful reception. And I want you to read a poem. Actually, you said you knew it by heart, which is so impressive. So she's going to recite a poem. But I wanted to ask, because I know, for example, Brazilian writer Chico Buarque, who is a wonderful songwriter and also a wonderful novelist. And he says he cannot do both things at the same time. So when he's writing a novel, he completely gives up the music. Yeah. And when he's writing songs, he can't begin to think of writing prose fiction.
Yeah.
Is it like that with you? It's either or can you be thinking of novels, of poetry while you're writing a novel?
No. I think it's absolutely. I think I can do poetry along with other things because there's just an elasticity to poetry, and it allows you to have a bit more room. But a novel is everything, and once you commit to being in that tunnel of writing the novel, then you have to stay in the tunnel.
You don't suddenly think, oh, there's a poem I want to write.
No. And it's like a switch of everything, a switch of language and scale. And so even though there might be, I think that, like, I don't know how it is for you, but if you see something that's usable, it just gets used into whichever form you're working on, So if I see something, then it will come into the novel. And if I'm writing a poem, then I'll find a way to bring it into the poem. So I'm always
there are one
alert,
or two writers who have amazing gifts of compartmentalization, who can do more than one thing at a time. When I remember, I knew Calvino a little bit, and in his apartment in Rome, he would have 3 desks. And he had a different book on each desk, as a work in progress. And he would decide, today I'll go and write that one. And he could keep them separate, because for me what happens is they all become the same thing, and
no, that's annoying. No, I don't do that. No. It's tough. No.
All right. So, since we're talking about poetry, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah.
Recite your poem.
Sure. I'll get up. So I'll just I'll do the title poem, I guess, since it's been a while. And this is called "Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods." Girls are coming out of the woods, wrapped in cloaks and hoods, carrying iron bars and candles and a multitude of scars collected on acres of premature grass and city buses, in temples and bars. Girls are coming out of the woods with panties tied around their lips, making such a noise it's impossible to hear. Is the world speaking too? Is it really asking, what does it mean to give someone a proper resting? Girls are coming out of the woods, lifting their broken legs high, leaking secrets from unfastened thighs. All the lies whispered by strangers and swimming coaches and uncles, especially uncles, who said spreading would be light and easy, who put bullets in their chests and fed their pretty faces to fire, who sucked the mud clean off their ribs and decorated their coffins with briar. Girls are coming out of the woods, clearing a ground to scatter their stories. Even those girls found naked in ditches and wells, those forgotten in neglected attics and buried in riverbeds like sediments from a different century. They've crawled their way out from behind the curtains of childhood, the silver-pink weight of their bodies pushing against water, against the sad, feathered tarnish of remembrance. Girls are coming out of the woods, the way birds arrive at morning windows, pecking and humming, until all you can hear is the smash of their minuscule hearts against glass, the bright desperation of sound, bashing, disappearing. Girls are coming out of the woods. They're coming. They're coming.
You see, it seems to me that's the angry piece of writing.
Yeah.
That's the anger that's underneath this book.
Yeah.
I
mean, I worked on the two books over a period of 6 or 7 years, but not with my two desks, but only the one desk. And so I would go from the novel to the poems, and I would shift in these different periods, but always carrying this kind of, that underbelly of some kind of rage,
Well, let's, since we've got there to this subject, talk about what's happening a little bit in India right now. Because, as you say, it's has been for some time now, a very dangerous environment for women.
Yeah.
Addition to that, now it's become a very dangerous environment for democracy. It's become violent against all sorts of things that people like me certainly value a great deal.
Yeah.
And against that, there is this extraordinary uprising of the young.
Yeah.
And not people of my generation who sit at home, not people of your generation who make Facebook texts. But the kids are extraordinary just now. They are so brave and unafraid, willing to risk themselves against a government that is ruthless, and is uncaring.
Yeah, I mean, the pictures I think that are coming out are, particularly young women and Muslim women as well. I think, like, if you think of Shaheen Bagh, which is a place in South Delhi where women, have of all ages, not just young women, but, grandmothers, wives who do their cooking, come back, and they've been there for 3 weeks or more, and really created this huge sense of energy and anger and protest. It's remarkable. And then you have the young student leaders of JNU, Aishi Ghosh, and you have all these stories, and in all the pictures you see these, and it's women, it's Indian women, and that to me, and men also. But there seems to be a really, it's half of the population is under the age of 25. That's a large number of young people who are very politically motivated in a way that we were talking backstage about how it feels that it's missed certain generations. And this now seems to be such an exciting moment, I think, in India, despite the fact that we have a very authoritarian government trying to pass extremely limiting laws on citizenship, and this sense of, whether you're Muslim or where you've come from, and all of this, detention camps, and really.
Well, it's that assault on the idea of the secular nation.
Yeah.
That's beyond Hindu-Muslim.
Which is enshrined in the Constitution.
It is the Constitution of India.
And people have been reading, passages of the Constitution.
What I think is
that.
most, in a way, extraordinary about the rising of the young is the way in which they're reclaiming the language of the independence struggle.
Yeah.
that in a way that the Congress Party, bless their hearts, as they say, is incapable of now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and yet these kids are
Yeah.
quoting chapter and verse of the language of the independence struggle and reclaiming it.
Yeah.
You know, saying the country is not this, it was that. It was that. That is what made the country. You know, and that's the most optimistic thing. You know, that the country in its young people is beginning to remember itself. You can say, we are this. We are not this thing that's happening now. You know.
And there seemed to have been a time of great historical amnesia where it was just, you know, oh, where did we come from? How did this happen?
Yeah.
And actually now, as you say, there's this sense of really reclaiming and also reframing a sense of what kind of country do we want to be, you know? What kind of and I think that's sort of one, you know, something hopeful.
No, it is. I mean, the problem is that the forces ranged against them are very unfeeling. You know, I mean, I mean, the government is saying, "Who cares about these demonstrations? We're just going ahead." You know, and which is what governments say until the momentum gets too great. You know, we have to see. You know? I mean, in a way, it's impossible to know if this thing will build, or if it does, it can really change the country.
Yeah.
You know, if it doesn't, then it'll be like the Prague Spring. You know, this wonderful moment which gets the tanks come in. You know, and stop it. But I think they all need our support. They need our vocal support.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
And bravo for them, I think. You know, and I think actually your book is related to that struggle because it's about independence. You know, it's about a woman who doesn't want to be anybody else's woman. You know, she even though it's not a polemical book, that's why I'm saying it's a big book masquerading as a small book, you know, because all those things are there in it.
Yeah.
You know? How are we doing here? Why don't we let you ask a few questions? And if you would...
If you have a question, raise your hand, and if you don't mind using the mic because we are live streaming.
Okay.
Thank you very much. To piggyback on what Mr. Rushdie said, when you wrote the book, did you intend for the big story or a small story?
No, small. A lot of it happens just in this house, you know, by the sea, and it's a very, I think, kind of claustrophobic in some places because this sense of what happens when you're in that kind of isolation and solitude. What are the dangers of it, and what are the, you know, where does it take you as a person? It is that sense of being stifled in a way. So it's small and close, but it does have these windows where it kind of opens up into other places. And I also think I'm very conscious of the fact that, you know, I'm writing about women primarily, like one woman, and I feel that women's fiction is always considered small. It's the space of the domestic, right? It's about the house, it's about caring, it's about keeping all of that. And I wanted to write that because I feel that that's also an important story, and that the national narrative of country comes from these stories that feeds into that. So yeah, I didn't want to write a big book set against a war and have that as the backdrop and three generations. No, I want to write about one woman in her house with her sister and these pack of 16 stray dogs that she finds herself in care of. And what is that life? And can that life then say something larger, you know, about a country and about a place? And I hope it does.
Can we just talk about dogs?
Sure.
Dogs are important to you.
Yes, they are.
And there are a lot of dog characters in this book.
Yeah.
I mean, So you want to just talk about the dog level of the book?
Yeah, the dog level. The dogs, and these are not just like regular dogs, because I've been like just stalking a lot of dogs in New York while I've been here, because you see great dogs around and they're wonderful. But those are pet dogs who have to play by certain rules. The dogs that I'm talking about are independent largely, and they're between wild and domestic. My dogs chose me. I didn't choose them. They decided that I'm going to look after them, and then I had this whole pack. And I think what I'm interested in that kind of creature is how they occupy this space, which is very much on the margin. And the word for those dogs in India is a pariah dog. Which also is interesting, that they're like always skirting on the edges, and how they survive and how they're so sturdy. And I have one who's extremely unfaithful. And you think of dogs as being loyal, but then I leave him a lot. So now he's befriended this other woman down the beach. And I'm heartbroken when he goes there. And I think, well, what's she feeding him, And then I have to contain my jealousy, because I think he's a free agent. He goes where he wants to go. He comes to me, that's great. And if he doesn't, and so it's like dogs with a lot of personality, because they come and go as they want. And so for me, that element, which sort of balances with the human in that place, they also provide another narrative of what it means to move in that world,
Yeah, no, it's a very important subplot, what
Yeah.
happens to the dogs.
Yeah.
And I mean, some really horrible things happen
Yeah.
to the dogs.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, because I know that you are such a dog person, that it's very interesting that the dogs are right at the center of this story, and they're in a way as significant
Yeah.
as many of the secondary characters.
I mean, I think the thing about dogs is that they seem harmless, and then once they start to come into your frame, then they take up a lot of space, and then you can't ignore them. So it would have been impossible for me to write a book in this place and
Without
just
dogs.
ignore the dogs, and say, no, you're not kidding.
Okay, somebody else. Over there.
It sounds amazing. Can I get that? The book sounds amazing, and thank you for that discussion. Definitely can't wait to read it. I'm curious about, you have Small Days, and the way that it's been described in the discussion also, in terms of some of its themes and points of interest. I'm wondering if it has connections to books like A Small Place, for example, right? Jamaica Kincaid, where, you begin with something that is very localized. It's about thinking about a place in these small ways, but in fact, it touches on so many much larger and deeper things. And so do you have writers, particularly female writers, I'm interested, that you are particularly drawn to, who work in that, small sphere, but who obviously lead to much bigger questions.
Yeah.
And in your own case, how much of that bigger question is a transnational question? Because you're questioning, where do we belong? Where are we slotted? But the fact is, people are on the move, right?
Yeah.
So even in a small place, and in your novel, you're moving so many different places.
Yeah.
Are you drawing questions that are parallel for women, let's say, in the U.S. to women in India, which could help avoid, for example, pinkwashing, right?
So one writer, a contemporary writer who I admire deeply, is Anuradha Roy. And a lot of her work is to do with small town India, and she writes about it so beautifully and so vividly. And I think for me, there's this sense of, again, not trying to say, well, I'm going to take on this large canvas, but I'm just going to inhabit this place. And she lives in a small place too, in the Himalayas. And I really admire that way of getting into the detail, and also the alienation of what it means to be in a place which is not considered the big, pulsating center of life and of the capital. And in terms of, I don't know, representation, I don't know, when you write, I don't think that you're thinking so much about what the writing is going to do. That's not really my job as such. I think I'm interested in voice. I want to create characters that you can identify with or that you can empathize with, that you might even struggle with, but you can feel for. And I want to have voice. And for me, that's really the important thing. In terms of who is going to read the story, what they're going to take of it, will it, transcend here? Will it speak to? That is like, it's beyond my reach as well, because I don't think that we're that powerful as writers. I think we only have in control the story that we want to write, and that is what I do. And then beyond that, it's up to everybody else's interpretation.
I wonder if you feel any kind of affinity to, for example, an American woman writer like Jesmyn Ward, who also determinedly lives away from the center, lives in the deep south and writes books about that, and seems to have made a not dissimilar decision to what you're talking about with Anuradha Roy and indeed and yourself. Are there, as it were, non-Indian writers like that you find speak to you in an interesting way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that also the decision now to live away is interesting, but also sometimes mandatory, because cities are offering, particularly Indian cities, they don't offer that much, that sense of, why do I need to be in the city if I'm just going to be, do I need this interaction so much, or can I dip into it once in a while? And I think it's very different from being a writer, during Hemingway's time, or sort of you had to be in Paris, or you had to be in New York, or you didn't have access to anything, And I feel like now it doesn't matter. You can just sit in your small place, and if you have a Wi-Fi toggle, then you can still be somewhat connected to what's happening. But you don't need to, doesn't feel like you need to actually be living in where everybody says stuff is happening. And so I really feel personally as a choice, it was the sense of moving even away from Madras, which a lot of people complain about being a boring city, but
I like Madras.
But it's not the big, it's not the Bombay.
No, but
that's why it's great.
The point.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I love it too.
Yeah.
But that sense of being able to move away even from that, it's an anarchic move to move from the city out. It doesn't make sense, because all the movement is happening the other way around. People are moving from villages to cities because that's where the work is. So this is a strange move out. But then you're saying, okay, I am prioritizing things differently. I am going to do something, I don't need
But it's interesting, there are quite a few Indian writers now moving away from the center. Going to places like Patna and Ludhiana, etc., and writing about those places as opposed to the metropolis.
Exactly.
It may be that the metropolis is less interesting than it used to be.
Maybe the great Calcutta novel has been written, and now the great Patna novel has to be written. So.
Exactly, the great Pune novel.
That's right.
Or in your case,
the Paramankeni novel.
The Paramankeni novel.
There you go.
You see, you may have written that. I'm not
I
sure.
have the corner on that. Nobody else is close.
All right, we've got a few minutes. Yeah, over here. Oh, all right, so there then.
Hi, I'm from Madras too. And my question was, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer? And was there a reason behind being a writer, or you just, it was a passion that you have?
I wanted to be a writer when I was 20 years old, and I was in college here in the United States, and I took a class in creative writing, and I decided that I had to be a poet, and that all my studies in economics and business administration were a waste of time. Unfortunately, that was not going to be the path that I was going to pursue. And it was because I understood that language somehow had such great possibility that I hadn't realized, and that I could actually be a part of framing things in my way, that I then thought, well, no, I want to be a poet. And it was a very decisive moment for me. I didn't know what it means to live as a poet, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But it was definitely a moment where I said, no, I'm changing the direction. And that happened here in the States, where I think in a way the educational system allows you to experiment a little bit and allows you to see what, what you might like or what you might be good at.
Well, then you became a dancer.
Then I became a dancer. Yeah, that was back in India.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Part of being a South Indian that you usually become. I mean, even I learned dancing, so I think that's a part of being South Indian that you want to be a dancer, and and then you have aspirations.
I actually never wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be a tennis player. I started playing tennis at 14, thinking that I would be the next Gabriela Sabatini. And for those of you who know that name, you can
That's not a very high ambition.
slot me. Yeah, well, Steffi Graf, okay. Anyway, I was not very good at tennis, and I think I became a dancer much later, at 26. Very strange, different story for a different time. But yeah, it was one of those things of, I suppose, also just being open to things, and it.
But you
happened.
specifically thought, I want to be a poet.
I wanted to be a poet.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a poet.
So you've lived in many different cities that are extremely different from each other, and I'm sure you've traveled quite a bit too. My question to you is, in your opinion, in which city are you most comfortable being a woman? And on the flip side, in which city are you least comfortable being a woman?
I mean, I'm comfortable being a woman. It's everywhere. I think I feel perhaps in North India when I've traveled a little bit more. I would say I have more of a guard up, and I'm much more aware of my surroundings and where I am, just because I feel that there's a sense of aggression, which is not there in the South so much. But I've been teaching at NYU in Abu Dhabi at the moment. It's incredibly safe. I never think about safety or anything. I just... I feel nothing will happen to me there. So that's been a very safe space, and unexpectedly so.
Okay, maybe one more question. Oh, there's two in the front here, maybe these two.
Congratulations, Professor.
Yo, there's one of my students.
And thanks to both of you. Despite not being a woman, not being from India, and being more of a cat person, I resonated with a lot of what you had to say, so thank you. I wanted to ask, there was a lot of talk about writing about anger and trauma and very strong emotions and experiences, and I think a writer I like once said that writing about your past and writing about these things is a bit like going after a diving bell. If you go down too far, then you'll get the bends. I was wondering if you had any. Had any advice or ideas about how to write about very difficult emotions and subjects without going too far, so far down that you end up either hurting yourself or compromising the quality of the writing.
Great question, Olivia. Thank you. Wow, that's a
student of yours?
That's a student of mine. Yeah, I did good.
Yeah. Something worked.
No, she has her own. Had nothing to do with it. No, I think, I don't think of writing as a catharsis, but I do think that it can come from, you are dealing with trauma, you are dealing with rage and all of this stuff. For me, the thing is also, I suppose, I think it's very important to have a sense of humor, and that's always to be able to make fun of yourself, but also to be able to see the absurdity of the human condition and to realize that it is just, we are always living with incredible beauty and incredible cruelty, and that these things always go together in some senses. And I suppose that as a writer, I'm trying never to go only in one direction of despair, that I always want to come back also to beauty and hold that as an important touchstone, as an important central thing. And I think that the thing about the bends is that it only happens if you come up too quick. So be slow and stay down. Yeah. And work through it, yeah.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
I just wanted to follow up on the theme of the flight from the metropolis that you were discussing. Would you? I'm going to start with an assumption. Has the book, or indeed your poetry, been translated into any Indian language?
No.
Would you have any interest in writing for a non-English speaking audience in India?
I mean, I don't think that I write for, I would love for my books to be translated, but these are things that have to come from somebody else. Somebody else has to say, oh, I'd love to translate your book into Tamil or into Hindi or Marathi. And I've tried, actually, because I think it is an important, it would be important for me because of that giant chip on my shoulder, that sense of, that this is an Indian story too, and even though I write in English, it's still, I'm writing about, India actually, and so it would be very important for me, but it hasn't happened, and so...
It took a very long time to happen to me.
Okay.
It really took decades, now there's a few translations of a few of the books in a few languages, but it really... For 20 years, there was nothing, and then it started happening. So you have time.
Okay, good to know.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bravo.